with the number of violent crimes increasing by 29% in 2021. 29% increase in a year. While our federal law enforcement officers have the enormous responsibility of arresting violent criminals, the department also has the responsibility to hold these criminals accountable. Unfortunately, recent actions from the department appear to be sending the wrong message. Our job is to ensure the department's budget is carried out efficiently, effectively, and to the benefit of the American people. I strongly believe that supporting law enforcement and efforts to combat the opioid epidemic should be a top priority for this subcommittee, and it will be. Attorney General Garland, we recognize that you have an incredibly demanding job, and I appreciate you being here today. I hope your testimony will reveal well-reasoned approaches to the many difficult criminal justice issues that affect our local communities. We will endeavor to be respectful of our witnesses' time, and we'll follow up with you should we have any additional questions. So at this time, let me recognize Mr. Cartwright for any remarks he may wish to make.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, and I join you in welcoming our witness, Attorney General Merrick Garland. Attorney General Garland, welcome back to our subcommittee, and we look forward to your testimony regarding the President's budget request regarding fiscal year 2024 for the Justice Department. Last year, we made critical investments and down payments in your department, and I look forward to hearing from you about how the resources we provided will support the important work across the Justice Department, as well as how these investments are making our communities safer in this country. The mission of the Justice Department is vast and broad. There is no shortage of topics I know we will discuss here today: enforcing and upholding the rule of law, supporting state, local, tribal law enforcement, combating drug trafficking networks to keep dangerous narcotics out of our communities, defense of our national security, and mitigation of emerging foreign and domestic threats, including cyber threats. I know we'll also hear of the critical tasks the department is carrying out, including preservation of civil liberties and support for free and fair elections, protection of vulnerable populations exposed to domestic and community violence, safeguarding our commerce and our economy. DOJ also administers a massive, complex detention and correction enterprise. It occupies a big part of its budget. DOJ adjudicates immigration benefits and oversees a broad and sophisticated criminal investigative and prosecutorial system. To carry out the department's broad missions I just mentioned, your FY 2024 budget request seeks $39.7 billion in discretionary funding, about 6% above the previous enacted level. While I know there are voices making noise about reducing funding levels across the non-defense agencies like DOJ, I don't think Congress can ignore some of the challenges we are facing in our communities back home. And I echo the concern of the chairman about the record number of deaths due to the opioid epidemic, as well as increases in crime and gun violence. Congress needs to continue to build on those investments we made last year to the COPS hiring program and increases to our federal law enforcement to provide them the necessary tools to face these existing and emerging challenges. Further, we need to sustain critical grant programs such as those under the Office on Violence Against Women to address the so-called shadow pandemic of domestic and partner violence, which did surge globally During the COVID-19 pandemic, Congress authorized new programs under the 2023 Violence Against Women Act reauthorization, and I look forward to seeing the continuation of those programs in FY 2024. Attorney General Garland, you have a big job that is only getting bigger all the time. So once again, welcome, and I look forward to your testimony and working with you on how we can best invest in fiscal year 2024. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Attorney General, you're recognized for an opening statement. Without objection, your written statement will be entered into the record. I would ask that you try to keep your statement to 5 minutes so that we can have additional time for questions. You're now recognized. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Rogers, Ranking Member Cartwright, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Justice Department's funding request for fiscal year 2024. Every day, the Justice Department works to keep our country safe from all threats, foreign and domestic. We work to protect the civil rights of everyone in our country, and every day in everything we do, we work to uphold the rule of law that is the foundation of our system of government. The Justice Department's budget request seeks the resources we need to continue and expand our work. To help keep our country safe, we are requesting more than $21.3 billion to sustain and expand the capacities of the FBI, DEA, ATF, and United States Marshal Service, as well as the offices of the United States Attorneys. These resources will help protect communities across the country. They will strengthen our efforts to counter the threats posed by hostile nation states, specifically the People's Republic of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. They will give us the resources we need to counter foreign and domestic terrorism, and they will sustain and expand our whole-of-government approach to combating violent crime, the epidemic of gun violence, and the scourge of drug trafficking. The department is also seeking $2.7 billion for our Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, the COPS Office, hiring program. This funding will enable us to help our state and local law enforcement agency partners to hire more full-time law enforcement professionals. As part of our efforts to disrupt drug trafficking, our budget requests $3.3 billion for DEA's investigations, diversion control, and counter-drug efforts across 241 domestic offices and 92 foreign offices in 69 countries around the world. The department is focused on getting deadly fentanyl out of our communities and combating the violent cartels that are putting it there. Just last week, DEA issued an alert warning about the emerging threat posed by the deadly combination of fentanyl and xylazine, which increases the risk of fatal drug poisoning. We also know that addressing the proliferation of deadly drugs requires more than just enforcement actions. So we are requesting more than $646 million for grants to help address the drug overdose epidemic and the public health challenges of addiction and drug use. The department's budget also requests significant investments in our efforts to combat economic crimes, protect the health, safety, and financial security of American consumers, and safeguard competition. This includes $770 million for our U.S. Attorney's offices to pursue investigations and prosecutions of complex economic crimes. And these include COVID-19 related fraud schemes that have targeted individuals and exploited the pandemic and stolen taxpayer dollars. Protecting civil rights was a founding purpose of the department in 1870, and it remains our urgent charge today. The department's budget requests significant investments to advance that work. This includes our efforts to protect voting rights, to combat hate crimes, to foster trust and accountability in law enforcement, to defend federally protected reproductive rights, and to advance environmental justice and tackle the climate crisis. Specifically, we are requesting a total of $251.6 million for the Civil Rights Division to carry out its important mission. We are also requesting $127.6 million to support the FBI's investigations of civil rights violations. Administering just immigration courts and correctional systems is another important area of departmental focus for which we are requesting additional resources. we are requesting $1.46 billion, a 69.2% increase for the Executive Office for Immigration Review to hire nearly 1,000 new staff. This includes 150 new immigration judge teams. These resources will support our efforts to apply the immigration laws justly and efficiently. We are also seeking $8.82 billion in funding for the Bureau of Prisons. These resources will help ensure the health, safety, and well-being of correctional staff and incarcerated individuals. They will help ensure transparency, accountability, and effective oversight of all federal prison and of detention centers. And they will enable the department to fully implement the provisions of the First Step Act and increase programming to prepare individuals in federal prisons for successful reentry. I'm extremely proud of the work the department's employees are doing to uphold the rule of law, to keep our country safe, and to protect civil rights. I respectfully ask for your support for the President's FY 2024 funding requests so that we may continue and build upon that work. Thank you very much.
Under the 5-minute rule, with questions for the witness, I'll begin by recognizing myself. Synthetic opioids, such as fentanyl, remain the primary driver of the increase in overdose deaths. In my home state of Kentucky, for example, more than 2,200 people died from drug overdoses in 2021. Nationwide, more than 107,000 lost their lives, increasing every day and every year. The department's budget submission has listed combating drug trafficking and preventing overdose deaths as a top priority. With that in mind, how can the department claim to be prioritizing the war on drugs when your budget submission for fiscal 24 only requests 4 additional DEA agents? The nation's primary drug-fighting organization, DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, with thousands of employees, in the face of this overwhelming epidemic that we're up against with fentanyl, a poison, you only ask for 4 additional agents and a reduction in program funding for the organized crime and drug enforcement task forces. Our cities are afire with violence and illegality, flooded with killer drugs, and you not only don't ask for more help for DEA agents, but you're actually promoting a reduction in funding for the organized crime and drug enforcement task forces. That I can't fathom. If we were to approve your budget submission as is, the organized crime and drug enforcement task forces would lose $25 million in funding and 70 task force agents. And instead, the department would gain nearly $45 million for zero-emission electric vehicles, cars. Does that sound like the budget request for a department that's prioritizing the war on drugs? I don't think so. Today, the DEA has identified Mexican drug cartels as largely responsible for the production of U.S.-consumed fentanyl using China-sourced primary precursor chemicals. How is the department addressing and prioritizing the China-Mexico cartel's U.S. drug trafficking pathway, General?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. I am a former narcotics and violent crime prosecutor. I am very well aware of this problem. The very first thing I did when I came into the Justice Department was to create a violent crime strategy because of the enormous increase we saw in 2020. And therefore, and I have met personally with the families of the victims of the fentanyl crisis. So so I'm personally charged with this problem. We are seeking an increase of $342.8 million, a 3.4% increase across Justice Department to counter drug trafficking, a total of $10.4 billion. Now, the budget math and the actual math doesn't always match up. So the actual number of agents that we are requesting are 131, not 4. The reason for the difference in the numbers is that FY23 budget, which only became effective recently, had 127. We're adding an additional 4, and the funding for FY24 will fund the in total number into FY24. In addition, we're seeking 50 diversion investigators and 35 analysts. So the actual total of drug fighting positions we're asking to add to the DEA is 216. OCDF, we're not cutting. We're keeping the same amount in OCDF, $550.5 million. I also want to make clear that with respect to violent crime overall, we are asking for a $1.4 billion increase over last year. This includes increases for the U.S. Attorney's offices, for the DEA, for ATF, FBI, and the Marshal Service, and also particularly important, the way we believe we need to fight both the drug problem and the violent crime problem is in partnership with our state and local partners. So we're asking for a $3.7 billion increase in the grants that we can give for cops hiring, for the Burn JAG, for the new gun crime prevention initiative, so that we can effectively partner in task forces with our state and local partners who are the boots on the ground in the war against both narcotics and violent crime. I want to be clear, this is an extraordinarily high priority for the Justice Department.
What are we doing to intercept or prevent the shipment of the precursor chemicals from China, exclusively from China, through the cartels in Mexico and into the U.S.? What are we doing to curtail the Chinese from forwarding this stuff here?
Mr. Chairman, you put your finger on an enormous problem, which is exactly what you said. The Chinese precursor companies are going into Mexico, being made into fentanyl, either powder or pills there. So we're attacking this in several ways. First of all, I've personally gone to Mexico twice to meet with the President of Mexico and with the Attorney General and with the security ministers there. I've met with them all again in the United States several times, trying to press them to cut off these precursors. Together with the Treasury Department, our government has sanctioned some of the precursor companies that we can find in Mexico. We will, as we did with respect to the the Russian oligarchs in Ukraine, we will seize and freeze and forfeit their materials when we find them. So we are doing an enormous amount, I think, to try to cut off this flow, which you are correct in describing as being the ultimate source of our problem.
Mr. Cartwright?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Attorney General, as I mentioned in my opening statement, there are voices on Capitol Hill calling for capping fiscal year 2024 spending levels at the fiscal year 2022 level, essentially a 22% cut below the enacted level last year. We sent a letter to your department asking for what that would mean for what you're up to in the department, and we got a letter dated March 18 back from your department, which I would ask unanimous consent to enter that letter into the record, Mr. Chairman. And you responded, and I want to say I'm concerned by some of the impacts highlighted in the letter, picking up on the train of thought Chairman Rogers was working on. I'm looking at cuts to the Comprehensive Opioid Stimulant and Substance Use Program, would see a reduction of $40.7 million. The drug treatment courts would see a reduction of $19.4 million. The victims, let's see. In fact, 22% reduction overall would mean a lot of things, starting with the war on opioids, but extending to so many other things. And I want to ask, what are some of your biggest concerns as relates to a 22% cut in what you got last year?
Well, to start off with the questions that the chairman asked me, it would be devastating for our efforts to combat drug trafficking. Totally devastating. It would lead to a $620 million reduction in base resources for the DEA. It would lead to a 28% reduction of the workforces in a single year of the U.S. Attorney's offices. These are the offices that bring the drug prosecutions and the violent crime prosecutions. It would lead to a loss of 11,000 positions at the FBI. At the Marshal Service, it would lead to our inability to replace 221 Deputy U.S. Marshals who are responsible, in addition to judicial protection, to fugitive task forces to find the people who we have arrest warrants on. And it would lead to enormous cuts in our COPS office and in our burn JAG grants. The consequence would be truly devastating to our efforts to fight violent crime and to our efforts to fight the drug traffickers.
Well, you mentioned COPS hiring program and the burn justice assistance grants. If those get cut by 22%, who gets hurt, Attorney General?
Well, those people who are hurt are the state and local. Well, there's a direct and indirect. The direct effect is we're not able to give the money to the state and local police departments. The ultimate effect is the communities that are plagued by fentanyl, the communities that are plagued by violent crime, because this money goes to state and local law enforcement for their own work against violent crime and drug trafficking, and to their work with us in task forces to attack both of those.
Sure, the COPS hiring program is federal assistance so that local municipalities that are strapped for cash to begin with right now can take federal money and use that toward the hiring of additional police officers. Is that correct?
That's right.
Well, if we were to absorb a cut of 22% to that program, how long would it take those local municipalities to recover from such a cut?
And we're estimating 300 to 400 fewer law enforcement funded positions as a consequence of a reduction of 50 million just in the COP hiring program. In the burn JAG, the awards to local governments would be reduced by an average of 30,000. State awards $1 million per state. I can't estimate how long it would take for them to recover from that, but they may never be able to recover from that. That requires state funding to make up for that. And whether the states are capable of providing that funds, I don't know. I assume that they're not, otherwise they wouldn't be relying on federal funds.
Well, you know, the chairman mentioned an increase in crime in this country over the last year. And of course, a lot of that has to do with the end of the pandemic and people being out and about more. But the truth is, it doesn't matter. If there's an increase in crime, no matter what the reason, we need to fight it. And the question is our ability to fight crime going to be increased or decreased if we have a decrease of 22% in your budget?
Be drastically decreased.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm listened with interest to the comments of the gentleman from Pennsylvania. I'm glad that he got a response, the minority got a response to their letter. I also sit on Judiciary, and my chairman, Mr. Jordan, has asked me to ask you about a letter he sent back in January asking you to appear before his committee. He has not gotten a response to that letter. And so I'd ask you, can I get a commitment from you to respond to him in the immediate future with several dates that would be, during which you would be available to appear before the Judiciary Committee?
Of course I'm going to appear before the House Judiciary Committee. I understand there are discussions about scheduling that have been going on. I don't think there's any problem in that respect.
There's been no response to the letter, so I think there's some question about whether you would be willing to appear. So getting your commitment to appear is helpful, and I thank you for that.
More than willing.
I listened with interest to your statement, and I found it quite incredulous that you would talk about the rule of law when your department and so many in your department have done so much to undermine the rule of law. I want to ask, internal communications showed that the DOJ and the National School Boards Association extensively colluded prior to your memorandum back on October 4th of 2021, which inserted federal law enforcement into local school board meetings. In fact, you previously testified to the House Judiciary Committee that the sole basis for your memorandum was the NSBA letter sent to President Biden back on September 29th, 2021, only 5 days earlier. Is that correct?
It's not correct that that was the sole basis, and that wasn't my testimony. My testimony was that it was an important basis in addition to seeing many, many, many reports in the news of threats of violence and violence in the preceding period.
On October 20th, 2021, the FBI's counterterrorism and criminal divisions operationalized your directive, announcing to all FBI special agents in charge the creation of a new threat tag, Edu Officials, to track school board-related threats. Is that correct?
So this is an internal FBI operational working. I didn't know about it at the time. I've seen it now. All it is, from what I've read of the FBI's own testimony, is that when a particular kind of person is, when there's a threat against a particular kind of person, there's a particular kind of tag put on the information. So if it's a threat against an education official, it's put on education. If it's a threat against a Supreme Court justice, it's SCOTUS, S-C-O-T-U-S. The tags don't mean anything other than a way to track how many threats of this kind are aimed at particular kinds of people, so the FBI can figure out whether this is a serious problem or not a serious problem.
Do you know how many citizens were tagged with this threat?
I don't know. I think the FBI returned that there were, in their own subpoena response to Mr. Jordan, I think there were around 20 as to whom what are called guardians were attached to for further investigation. Yeah.
22 to be exact, and 6 were actually investigated by the Counterterrorism Division of the FBI. Citizens of this country who were trying to make their voices heard at their school board meetings and instead were tagged by the FBI as terrorists by agents of this government seeking to silence their voices. When it was discovered eventually that this was not the national threat that the Biden administration or the School Boards Association wanted it to be, why didn't you withdraw the memo?
So let me be clear about the memo. The memo was aimed at violence and threats of violence. It was not aimed at parents protesting to their school boards. In fact, it was very clear in the second sentence that that is constitutionally protected. The thing that is not constitutionally protected are threats of violence and violence. The memo was not aimed at parents in any respect. It was aimed at violence and threats of violence against school administrators and teachers.
And yet, after it was determined that this was not a national threat, you refused to withdraw the memo, and the agents of the FBI continued to act as if your memo were still in force and still in effect. So, would you agree that you just continued to put forward this false rhetoric to your agents that was not corrected and resulted in the investigation of hardworking American citizens just wanting to have their voices heard at the ridiculous indoctrination going on in their school boards?
The investigations were not aimed at hardworking individuals who were just trying to protest
The documents you provided show that they were the opening of 6 investigations in your counterterrorism division.
My understanding is that there were no full-field investigations opened at all, that all of them were in the end referred to state and local.
Exactly, where they should have been in the first place. It's
that was-
clearly a state and local issue, should never have started, and I yield back.
Ms. Morelli?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Attorney General, for being here. As we've been discussing today, the Department of Justice's ability to achieve its public safety mission will be severely hampered by reducing funding to fiscal year 22 enacted levels. A number of my colleagues have pointed out the impact on various aspects of the department. I wanted to just focus, if I can, for a moment on the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives in particular. ATF plays a key role in addressing gun violence crisis in our nation. It's the only federal agency that I'm aware that ensures gun dealers and manufacturers are following federal law and is uniquely positioned to investigate and prevent firearms trafficking. However, for years, ATF has been starved of resources and understaffed. Although its goal is to inspect each license holder once every 5 years, a recent report indicated the ATF only inspects around 7% of federal firearm license each year, making it virtually impossible to ensure dealers are maintaining compliance with even the most basic requirements. Can you just comment, sir, on the effect that cuts to the agency would have on its ability to properly inspect gun dealers?
Well, the ATF has two obligations. One is directly fighting violent crime through their work in tracing of of guns at crime scenes, ballistics with respect to crime scenes, participating in the anti-trafficking task forces. And then the other side of their obligations are the ones that you've also described with respect to inspecting gun dealers, to ensure that the rules that Congress has passed about who's prohibited from holding a gun, former felons, for example, are enforced. And the consequence of the cuts to the ATF would be extraordinary. A loss of 190 agents, which would include 130 industry operation investigators and 180 tech support staff. That would eliminate all state and local training that ATF does at the National Center for Explosives Training. And it will increase the amount of time necessary to trace a gun found at a crime scene by more than 2 months. But by eliminating the 130 industry operations investigators that you're talking about, it would make it completely impossible to make the kinds of inspections every 5 years that you were asking.
Would you support increased funding to ensure that ATF has the resources to both train and hire enough staff to oversee the industry?
Yes, and that is included within our, I'm trying to find the exact amount that we've asked for in addition for the ATF. The request we've asked for, so this comes under the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, and so we've asked for, which was passed last year. So we've asked for an increase of $71.1 million, which would include funding for these purposes.
I want to just stay on the same subject just for the moment. The National Tracing Center of ATF establishes chain of custody of firearms recovered in crimes, providing against investigative leads, federal, state, and local agencies as they work to solve firearms crimes and collect intelligence about trafficking, as I understand it. Can you discuss the impact that proposed cuts to the agency would have on the time it takes to trace guns at the center?
I don't know the exact amount of time that it would take, but obviously with that many fewer people available to do the tracing at the center, it would take enormously, a longer amount of time. I think the specific thing that I cited was 2 months for tracing. So I'm not sure whether that answers the question that you're asking, but I think this is exactly the question that you were asking. It would increase by 2 months the amount of time at the National Tracing Center.
Very good, which would obviously severely hamper investigations.
Yes.
I want to just, with the remaining few seconds I have, I represent Rochester, New York, in the midst of devastating cycle of gun violence. The number of homicides in 2021 was a record high of 84 last year, nearly the same amount. And I've asked for the department to prioritize firearm prosecutions and organize enhanced collaborations between state and local partners. In May of 21, the department announced the comprehensive strategy for reducing violent crime, initiatives like Standing Violent Crime Reduction Steering Committee, directing U.S. attorneys to develop comprehensive strategies. Can you just provide an update on the strategy and resources that are needed to further your efforts?
Yeah, so what you're referring to particularly is the memo that I issued soon after I came into the department. I'm happy to talk generally about our strategy. I'll point out for your purposes for Rochester. Rochester is now, was announced last July, will be one of the grant recipients for the Project Safe Neighborhoods program. And also at the same time, it'll be one of the new sites for the National Public Safety Partnerships.
Thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry. I I don't know if you can comment further. I don't want to, I wanted to yield back because I see the balance of my time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Morelli. Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Attorney General, for being here today. I want to just talk real quick about patriotism. It's something that has driven me personally. Patriotism compels us to love our country, right? It compels us to want security for our country. It wants us to, as a nation, be dominant on the global stage and with peace and tranquility within our borders. Patriotism, however, it doesn't require us to trust our government. That is earned, and that is only earned after a track record of performance and citizens actually witnessing their government working for them, not for themselves. And I think of all agencies right now, the Department of Justice that you head has got a brand name problem, has a trust issue with the American people. There's several encroachments over the last few years, the weaponization of the Justice Department, FISA issues that go back several years. And for me personally, when I'm in meetings like this and I hear the Attorney General for the Department of Justice qualify justice with terms like environmental justice, social justice, climate justice, racial justice, whether it's in the written testimony or verbal, the hair on the back of my neck stands up, because anytime you put a word in front of the word justice, you're diluting justice. And you're actually putting a finger inadvertently on the scales of justice, and it changes the paradigm of our country from one that is guaranteeing equality to one that starts searching for equity. And in the Constitution, equality is guaranteed, not equity. So I want to start there, because I think that's very important to understand that you do have a brand name issue right now and a trust issue with the American people. And it's going to come to a head in the form of this FISA conversation that's going to be happening here in the near term. No mention of it here today in your oral testimony, nothing as far as I can see in the written testimony. But as you know, FISA is coming to expire before the end of this year, if I'm not mistaken. And right now, I don't believe that the majority of Congress, and it may be a very slim percentage of Congress that actually supports a renewal of FISA. And I sit on the Intel Committee. I understand why we have FISA, what we use it for, what value it brings to our nation's security. And I still don't trust the Department of Justice, the FBI, and other federal agencies to use FISA in accordance with what it is intended for, and that is to keep Americans safe and not to be used against Americans who are not a threat to the country. So I'd like you to comment on that. I also want to make a quick comment on the fentanyl discussion, because that's been the front and center focus of this so far. I appreciate you going to Mexico. I appreciate you attempting to put sanctions on the Mexican companies that are partaking in the precursor development. But until we, the collective we, Congress, Secretary of State, Treasurer, Commerce, Justice, President, put a finger in the chest of China and go after the companies in China that are developing the precursor materials there before they get on a slow boat to Mexico and across our borders. 300 people will die of fentanyl today, and I would submit that the crisis at our southern border is by far the #1 national security crisis that we have. Its origins are in China. The route is through Mexico and across our border. It's fully characterized. We all know that. And 300 people today will die because we are doing nothing about it. It's you, it's the DEA. Everything we have done has failed. Okay, so we need this administration to recognize that the fentanyl crisis, not climate change, is the closest alligator to the canoe killing Americans right now. But I would love for you to talk to us about FISA and how you're going to reinstill confidence from Americans in the Department of Justice so that we can have all the tools available to you so you can actually ensure this country's security and do what's right in accordance with the Constitution.
So you've given me a lot to unpack here. Let's begin with where you started, with patriotism. I have devoted virtually my entire public life, my entire life as an adult, to public service. I have done it on the streets of Washington, D.C., facing drug traffickers, including murderers. I have done it in the Justice Department, facing across the table someone who'd killed more than 160 people in a bombing. I've done it repeatedly in that respect, and I spent almost 25 years ensuring the rule of law as a judge.
And I want to be clear, I'm not questioning your patriotism, sir. I respect your service. I appreciate your service. What I'm trying to impart is that patriots are not compelled to trust their government.
Absolutely
and
not.
The citizens that we work for want us to earn that trust from them.
And I completely agree with that. And that's why I gave up the bench to come to the Justice Department, try to reinstill trust in the Justice Department and in our government. It's why I've reinstilled the norms of the department of treating like cases alike, of keeping partisanship out of the department, of ensuring that partisanship and improper influences don't affect our criminal investigations. That's all part of what I've been trying to do, and that's the whole reason I gave up a life tenure. Now let me focus on 702. 702, first time I was in the Justice Department, we had plain FISA. I'm just going to call it plain FISA. We did not have 702. That was passed by the Congress after 9/11 while I was in the court. When I came, I didn't know what 702 exactly did. I've now found every morning at my all threats briefing provided by the FBI and the Intelligence Committee that an extraordinarily large percentage of the intelligence we get comes from 702. This is what we need in order to fight the Chinese, particularly. We're getting information about their cyber attacks, about their efforts to exfiltrate information, about their efforts to export our military information, our computer science, our advanced technologies, about their efforts to control dissidents who have fled China and are in the United States. That's just one small sliver of it, but since you're particularly asking about China, the consequences of removing 702 is not going to punish the Justice Department. It's going to punish the American people in the most direct way possible. That includes the threats we get from Iran, the threats we get from Russia, the threats we get from North Korea. But I totally agree with you. We need the trust of the American people on this. And that is why one of the first things I did when I came into the Justice Department and received one of the so-called 702 reports about the non-compliance incidents, I'm sure that you're very familiar with those, was to issue a memorandum to the FBI saying that these had to be fixed, that we had to put into place new methods to ensure that they didn't occur. I've asked the Deputy Attorney General to task management of this, and she has done that. The FBI has put up an internal office of audit for the purpose of ensuring this. We've changed the way in which the FBI software for querying 702 occurs, and we have really a fantastic independent set of auditors in our National Security Division. The consequence of just these changes have been an almost 90% reduction in queries of Americans. But I desperately want FISA to be continued, not because I care about it for myself, but because I care about it for the American people. And we want to work with you and with the members of Congress to work out a way in which FISA 702 can continue. So I think I'm in complete agreement. Patriotism and the need for trust and the need for FISA and the need to be sure that people, the American people, can trust that 702 is done properly.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Mr. Ruppersberger.
Thank you. First thing, thank you for being here. This discussion, I think, is very important. I, too, was an investigative prosecutor with wiretaps. The majority of what we dealt with there, other than some murder and all, was drugs, and it's never going to stop. Even with the cartels right now, they were nasty. They were killers, and they do bad things to people. But they're even more sophisticated and have probably more money than we do now. Now, what I want to talk about, and I want to talk about a little bit, just a comment to Mr. Garcia. I know your background. I respect your background. You've raised some very good issues here. I would just hope that those of us on both sides of the aisle, when it comes to crime, that we really focus on what we need to do. Any good investigative prosecutor will tell you we need we need FISA. But we have to have these checks and balances, and that's what we do in Congress when you move from one role to another role. So I would call out, and I've worked with many people here, and Chairman, we've worked a lot together on international issues and this issue. My one focus that I've done a lot in my experience on the Intelligence Committee and those type of things is cybersecurity. It's a very, very serious issue. We have to deal with it. We have to be very sophisticated. China, we in 2004, we didn't realize it, but China was stealing most of our information. Thank goodness we turned it around, got with NSA, and those things are working better right now. My question, can you explain to us what going backwards? And this just drives me crazy. How can we, with all the issues that are out there, the drug issues, the international issues, how can we talk about cutting this budget to the percentage what it is? I can't think that anybody, especially who've worked in law enforcement, could let that happen where we are, and it's going to get worse. And China is ahead of us right now in a lot of areas. So we better wake up and hopefully come together on some bipartisan issues and stand up for FBI, stand up. Unfortunately, DEA doesn't have any people. DEA has never been funded properly. So one of the things you had more funding, and when FBI did get into the narcotics, the one thing we had to talk them into, they couldn't wear wingtip shoes anymore when they were investigating. But when they got in, it really increased, and then the DEA would go into the tough areas and a lot of the undercover. What do you think we need to do to working FBI and DEA to make sure that we somehow get the resources to move forward? And I want to know what impact, because this is an important message to get out to the American public, this kind of cut will do. We can talk about issues which is important, education and other things, but we're focused on this right now. What would be the impact for these cuts that we're talking about on the things that we've talked about, contract murder, we're talking about cybersecurity, these things. You've had a lot of experience, and if you could, in a very stern way, let us know how serious this is.
Well, let me take the easier question first, which is FBI and DEA. The last time I was at the Justice Department, I spent most of my time trying to iron out turf wars between FBI and DEA and elbowing each other. When I came in this time, I was really very happy to see that the two agencies work together extremely well. FBI does do some drug task forces. DEA is obviously the principal agency doing that, but they've worked out memorandums of understanding so that their investigations are deconflicted, and most of these investigations are now done on joint task forces. So I'm extremely pleased with the way in which DEA and FBI
And I
work.
agree with you. I think it's strike force is the best way, federal, state, and local, to move forward in this realm.
And on the question of the effects of the cuts, I'll say really what I said before, which is neither the DEA nor the FBI can really survive with the kind of cut. Well, they can survive, but they're violent crime and drug trafficking missions can't really survive if there were a 22% cut across the board in those.
Well, those of us who agree with your point of view, we need to work with you and to get the message out how serious this could be to our safety, to what could happen to the United States, especially as it's focused on China, but it's everywhere, as you know. I'll yield back.
Mr. Clyde.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, for holding this hearing, and for Attorney General Garland for attending. In your opening statement, you said that you work to uphold civil rights. Is the Sixth Amendment one of those in the Bill of Rights?
The Sixth Amendment is one.
It is, great.
Certainly a civil right.
And you work to uphold civil rights for all Americans, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. When the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution says the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury, what kind of a time frame does a speedy trial mean?
Well, there's two different ones. So there's the Speedy Trial Act.
That's correct.
I used to be able to tell you exactly how long it took, but I believe at least the first part I remember is 30 days from the complaint.
That's correct.
I think it's 120 days after that, and then there are exceptions for different motions for speedy trial.
Okay, I believe it says 70 days from the filing of charges of the defendant's appearance
Been a
before the
long time
judicial
since I
officer.
actually appeared in magistrate's court to make that argument.
Okay, great. I'm glad you are well aware of that. Mark Houck was arrested September 23rd, 2022, and found not guilty on January 30th, 2023. The jury deliberated about an hour. DOJ accused Houck of twice assaulting the volunteer in front of a Planned Parenthood clinic and charged him with 2 counts of violating the FACE Act, freedom of access to clinic entrances. The arrest to the trial took just over 4 months. Would you consider that a speedy trial?
Yes.
All right, so would I. Last week, I visited the D.C. Department of Corrections and met with some of the 20 prisoners who were arrested in connection to the events at the Capitol on January the 6th. According to a Just Security article that came out on March the 20th, 11 of the 20 have not accepted a plea deal, nor have they even been brought to trial. Today is March the 29th, 2023. Attorney General Garland, is it correct that since their arrest, some of these individuals have been waiting approximately 2 years for their trial?
Look, I don't know the specifics of individual cases. The beauty of the Sixth Amendment is that each of those people is entitled to a lawyer, has a lawyer who can make a speedy trial argument in the court. Oftentimes, lawyers ask for more time. Oftentimes, they ask for exceptions for discovery. There was an enormous amount of discovery in those cases, but I don't know anything about the particular cases.
Does waiting 2 years for a trial meet the speedy trial clause of the Sixth Amendment?
It can if the exceptions to the Speedy Trial Act are met. Those are the responsibility of the lawyers for those defendants to bring to the
Well, I would like you to look into that, because to me, I don't think waiting 2 years for your trial complies with the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution.
This is an argument to be made before the judge. The judge has the authority to dismiss a case for a violation of the Speedy Trial
You're
Act.
absolutely correct. A judge does have that authority. You know, like you said in your opening statement, you work to uphold the civil rights of all Americans. I think in this case, their civil rights are being violated, and I would appreciate you looking into that. In your opinion, should unauthorized agencies or unauthorized programs in the federal government receive funding through the Appropriations Committee, through this committee?
I'm sorry, I'm not following the question. If it hasn't been authorized, I
Correct. In your opinion, should unauthorized agencies or unauthorized programs in the federal government receive funding through this Appropriations Committee?
At a high level of generality, it seems like a syllogism. If it's unauthorized, it shouldn't have appropriations.
I agree. We have authorizing committees and we have appropriating committees here in Congress. Before a government agency or program can come into existence, it must be authorized. Then we as appropriators add the money to make the program function. So I agree with you that if a program is not authorized, it should not be appropriated. Is the Department of Justice currently authorized for appropriations?
Okay, now you got me here. I'm no expert at the difference between authorizations and appropriations in specific programs.
Well, we have authorizing committees, and the authorizing committee for the Department of Justice would be the Judiciary Committee.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Well, I will tell you, right here, Public Law 109-162, the last time the Department of Justice was authorized was 2009. 2009, when your budget was $26.2 billion. So you're asking for an appropriation of $40 billion, and the department does not have an authorization. I think that's a problem.
Well, I think you got me in a certain way, but that means that during the entire previous Trump administration and much of the Bush administration, the Justice Department was also
Well,
unauthorized.
that would be the Obama administration.
Well, if it's since 2009, it would also include the,
Well, through 2009, right here.
from 2009 to today, and all the previous administrations were also unauthorized.
That's correct, and it's incumbent upon the Department of Justice to ask for an authorization.
I have to, when I don't know the answer, I think the truthful thing for me to say is I don't know the answer, and I don't know the answer.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm finding it difficult to approve an appropriation to an agency that has not requested an authorization. And how can I, in good conscience, appropriate taxpayers' money to an unauthorized agency? So, giving you the benefit of the doubt, and the last time that you were authorized, which was 2009, I would think that $26.2 billion is probably the
Time of the
most we can
gentleman has
offer.
expired.
Thank you. And I yield back.
Mr. Trillin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Cartwright and Attorney General Garland. Thank you very much for appearing here today. As co-chair of the bipartisan Second Chance Task Force, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Bureau of Prisons and recovery outcomes. The data it's clear that the best way to reduce recidivism is through stable employment. In fact, the probability of reconviction of someone that's earning at least $10 an hour for 2 months is 8% is the recidivism number for that individual, versus the probability of the unemployed ex-offender is 60%. So justice impacted individuals are prevented from realizing their potential for a number of reasons, including lack of job training. The Bureau of Prison faces severe staffing shortages. The BOP is staffed at 86%. They're funded at 93%, which leads to augmentation, whereas educators, medical professionals, the key people, are forced to work as correctional officers. If they were a business, it would definitely fail. But this not only creates an unsafe prison conditions for the staff and for the inmates, but also affects their ability to program reentry and the ability of the inmates to access literacy classes, job training, substance use disorder, mental health treatment, etc. To make matters worse, extremists would like to drastically cut back to FY22 funding. These budget cuts will harm law enforcement. Could you talk about how decreasing funding to 22 levels will impact the safety of our correctional staff and also the inmates?
Yes, it would be devastating to the Bureau of Prisons, as it would be to all of the components at the Justice Department. It would make the staff less safe for themselves. It would make the prisons less safe for the prisoners. It would devastate our reentry programs and our anti-recidivism programs. BOP estimates that the consequence would be a complete hiring freeze and a furlough of more than 33,600 employees for 60 days. It would require the augmentation problem, which you're referring to, which means having non-correctional officers at work on correctional responsibilities. It would augment the non-custodial staff almost 100% of work hours. And the facilities would really only be able to address emergency requirements, so the First Step Act requirements would not be able to be met.
So meeting the First Step Act would be an impossibility.
Yes.
BOP is also the largest mental health and substance use provider in the country. 159,000 people incarcerated, 2/3 suffer serious mental health, 25% have substance use disorder. If the BOP funding levels are decreased to FY22, how will that affect the Bureau's ability to provide mental health treatment and MAT to inmates?
Yeah, so I don't have a specific breakdown with respect to MAT, but it is of course correct that we've asked for $409.45 million in order to cover all the First Step Act programs, including the medicated assisted treatment. And a 22% cut would mean we would get none of this. This is just an extrapolation, but I assume this means that we would not be able to provide MAT.
Exactly. Would you agree that one of the leading causes of recidivism and making our country less safe is the lack of mental health and substance use disorder treatment in our prisons?
It's certainly one of the you've put your finger on an important problem, which is that recidivism is a problem with respect to violent crime in the country. The purpose of the First Step Act, which was a bipartisan action by the Congress, is to try to reduce recidivism. And there are a number of ways in which it can be reduced, including all the things you've mentioned, including in particular vocational training, but obviously also medically assisted training. If people come out of the prisons still addicted or with a need to get drugs, they're highly likely to recidivate.
Just quickly, solitary confinement. We introduced a bill last year to reform solitary confinement. President Biden has stepped up on this and issued an executive order to reduce restrictive housing. Yet, unfortunately, the percentage of BOP inmates has gone up. What steps is DOJ and BOP taking to implement the President's executive order?
So there are 3 different kinds of restrictive housing. There is special management units, There's the administrative maximum units, so-called supermax, and then there's the special housing units. So both of the first two, which are the most severe restrictions, are down since 2016. The special management unit is down 56% population since 2016. The administrative max, or ADX population, has decreased 17%. Unfortunately, the special housing unit populations have increased. It's not exactly clear, but it looks like a significant part of this is COVID, the difficulty of moving people in and out between different places, and individuals waiting in the special housing units for transfer to designated facilities. The new director of the Bureau of Prisons, who I appointed, has taken this on as a personal responsibility on her part to get these numbers of people in the remaining restricted housing units down.
Thank you. I yield back, and she's doing a wonderful job.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Elzey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General. It's good to be here. We've not met before, but as soon as I shook your hand, I understand that you have some pretty thick skin. Because you get run through the ringer up here, and I appreciate your time and in coming up here. I'll get right to it. Are you familiar with the term, now, Congressman Garcia, Congressman Gonzalez, and I are all in naval aviation in our previous careers. Have you ever heard the terms alligator's closest canoe?
Yeah, I think I've heard it, the nearest bear to the door, but
That's it?
pretty
All
much
right.
the same, I think.
And have you heard the term stump the chump?
No, afraid of not.
Okay. That means when you ask a question that you're not going to get the right answer on, or something like, it's something to put somebody on the spot. I promise you I'm not going to play that game with you
appreciate
today.
it.
But we are going to talk about the alligator closest canoe. I'm from Texas 6, which is just south of Dallas. I have a 9-county district, which has gotten pretty big, largely rural, not a whole lot of money in the district. And as I look at the budget requests for some of these programs, and I understand you have a very large department. You have a lot of folks working for you, and I know you didn't write this budget request yourself. And then you have to be under the microscope to answer for it. So I'm going to ask you a couple hard questions, namely about the SCAP program, which helps offset the cost of local law enforcement for holding within their jails illegal aliens who are criminals, either have been convicted of a felony or 2 misdemeanors. And previous to that, we had $234 million allocated to that program. And that program's been cut. And I'm curious to know if there's an alligator closest canoe, which is, again, I said I'm not going to play stump the chump. We have a illegal immigration problem. We have a drug problem coming from the border. We have a human trafficking problem coming from the border. I think we can agree with that. So I asked my local sheriffs how much it costs them to hold some of these folks. So I've got 9 counties, but I talked to Sheriff Elmer Tanner of Navarre County, Brad Norman of Ellis County, my home county, Bill Wayburn of Tarrant County. We're still waiting on some of those numbers. There's 254 counties in Texas, and I would argue that Texas is bearing the brunt of what's going on the border. So I heard back from Elmer in Navarre County. He has held 28 of these criminals for a total of 2,067 days. At $69 a day, that's $142,000 cost to Navarre County and the taxpayers of Tarrant County. There's only 52,000 people there. That's real money for counties like mine, in my district like mine. So my question is, if we're going to do away with $234 million program under the justification of more emergent problems, like new grant problems, like the Accelerating Justice System Reform, which is $300 million discretionary over 10 years, incentivize jurisdictions in undertaking the critical work of addressing the entrenched issues of inequity and disparity, that's not the alligator closest canoe. Who on earth decided to cut that entire program that's going to offset my sheriffs from having to house illegal immigrant criminals for that program? And that's just one of many, but I don't have that much time to go over all of it. So I'd like to see why you can justify cutting that money, justify the request for the other money, and would you be willing to reinstate the SCAP program?
So I think you correctly analyzed my problem here, which is my microscope was not focused on SCAP. And I don't know the answer to your question, but I'd be happy to look at it again, or for myself for the first time, and have our staff talk to yours about the SCAP program and whether there was an alternative source of funding or some other arrangement was made. I just honestly don't know, and my experience before this and other committees is it's best if I say I don't know when I don't know.
So that is an acceptable answer. We learned that at the Naval Academy too. That is a perfectly acceptable one. I'd love it for you to look into it because it's important to a district like mine that's not made of money, and we're doing the federal government's job. We do have a problem on the border, and my sheriffs in my district are saying, where's the money coming from? And we've just cut all of it. And they were already only getting 31 cents on the dollar to house these illegal immigrant criminals. And that affects my district very, very harshly. So my time's expired. I yield back. Thank you very much for the answer.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Attorney General, for being here. You know, when Uvalde happened nearly 10 months ago in my district, the first elected official to call me was you. And I'll be honest, I didn't have you on my bingo card as being the first call, and I want to thank you for that. And you said something then. You said anything I needed, you would help provide for as we were getting through Uvalde. And you know what? You kept to your word, and I appreciate that. I want to bring something up. I'm very concerned about, and look, I've done my part. I was one of 14 Republicans that helped pass the Safest Community Act. This is a bill that is going to provide more money in mental health in our nation's history. On this Appropriations Committee, you know, I helped pass the appropriations to get through some of your funding. Now, one of the concerns I have is with the COPS and the Stop School Violence grants, okay? Some deep concerns with that. And what I've done is a lot of my communities, we're still healing from Uvalde. A lot of my communities are very concerned with their children's safety. Hell, I'm concerned with my children's school safety. And so one of the things that I represent 119 cities and towns in my district. And I've gone to every one of these little towns and I said, you need to put in for COPS grants and Stop School Violence grants. They don't have any grant writers, they don't have any resources, and they've been putting it in. And guess what? They've been denied time and time again. And I'll give you specifics. City of Divine, denied. City of Marfa, denied. Bexar County, denied. Medina County, denied. City of Castroville, denied. El Paso County, denied. These are things that I put letters of support behind, and they've been denied. I had, in Marfa, they have 4 police officers in that town. If this grant, if the COPS grant, if they would have gotten this COPS grant, they would have gone from 4 to 5 police officers. You know how excited they were? They were going, Tony, we get another police officer, we can do all these different things. They stayed up, I kid you not, they stayed up until 11 o'clock the day before it was due, because I'm pushing them. They submit it and then they get denied. I flagged this for you because in your budget request, you have a reduction, your department has a reduction, a cut in COPS and schools and Stop School Violence grants. It boggles my mind on the discretionary spending for that. It boggles my mind. We just saw what happened in Nashville a couple days ago. Seems like every week there's something that's happening from a school, schools under siege here. I need your help. I'm absolutely doing my part. I need your help. Would love to hear your thoughts on what we can do to get these COPS grants and get these Stop School Violence grants over the finish line.
Okay, so this is a big, you've identified something that I don't know about these specific sheriffs, and I would like my staff to meet with yours to go over these particular grant applications so we can figure out what the problem was there. We've put a lot of money into, and we have it in part of our request now, helping rural sheriffs make the applications, particularly small sheriff's offices, small law enforcement offices, as you've described, sometimes have difficulty. It's not just filling out the paperwork, it's doing the computer work and everything. We've recognized that, and we had a program to make that easier under our OJP grants. Obviously hasn't succeeded here. I do want to say that we are asking, with respect to funding for state and local police, we're asking for more than $4.5 billion this year in both discretionary and 5-year funds. For the COPS hiring program, we're asking for an increase of $2.4 billion this year, not a decrease, an increase, a $213 million increase in the yearly funds and a $2.2 billion in a multi-year funding. The STOPS grants come under the Office of Violence Against Women Act, and they're also increased. It may be that there are two parts of these. There's a new gun crime prevention strategic fund, which is an increase of $884 million, or $4.4 billion over 5 years. It will provide some of the funding that used to be in some of the other programs, and that includes hiring, recruitment, retention, training of officers. I think, so we're in no way reducing the amount, we're increasing it. Your offices may still be having the kind of problems that we've discussed, and I'm going to ask my team to talk to yours about it.
I'd appreciate that because this is an important topic that's not going away anytime soon. And what I'm starting to see is people are giving up in the federal government. They're going, why even submit it, Tony? It's a waste of my time. The need is absolutely there, especially in these small communities. We'll work our guts out in our office to help identify these people, vet them to make sure that you're getting good products. I wouldn't put a letter of support behind any of these projects if I didn't do the due diligence on my end, but I need your help. You have a partner up here to get things over the finish line, but I need your help. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Time has expired. That concludes the first round of questions. I believe we probably have a few members who would want to be part of a second round. But, so we will do that, but we will take a 5-minute recess.
If I could,
Committee stands in
Mr.
recess.
Chairman, if I could have an indulgence for just one moment with respect to my answer to Mr. Klein.
Yes.
I've taken a look at that FBI response to the subpoena. There actually was a full field investigation. I don't know any of the details about it, but there was, and if you take a look at the letter, I think I said there were none, but it turns out there was one.
Committee stands in recess for 5 minutes. Committee will be in order. I thank the Attorney General for being amenable to lengthening our visit together. We will conclude shortly, we hope. I'll recognize myself for an opening of a second round. Attorney General, in the 24 budget request, you say, and I quote, "The United States has experienced a dramatic increase in violent crime incidents, with the number of violent crimes increasing by 29% in 2021. That's an alarming statement, and I'm sure we agree on that. We should be prioritizing targeting violent crime across the country, and yet your budget submission is full of funding for programs that aim to keep criminals on the street as opposed to behind bars. We're seeing unprecedented warfare, if you will, in our major cities across the country, in every region of the country. Violent crime. And we should be tackling the problem face on. But the department, for example, requests $50 million for a new program that would incentivize jurisdictions to empty juvenile detention facilities, close the prisons. Sounds like a follow-up to the defund the police movement. Your December 2022 memorandum revising the department's charging and sentencing policies make it harder for prosecutors to charge criminals and encourages lighter sentences. Why are we handcuffing federal prosecutors from holding criminals accountable at such a dangerous time across the country? Sir?
I completely agree that we need to prioritize violent crime, and we are doing that. The memorandum that you're talking about says in several places, but particularly right at the beginning, the purpose is for us to be able to allocate our resources and focus them on combating violent crimes. So the sentence, a discretion that's being given to the prosecutors is aimed at using their resources against violent crime, and in no way calls for reductions in sentences with respect to violent crime. In every place in that memorandum, it explains that violent crime sentences are to be used to the extent needed to prevent dangers to the community. With respect to defunding the police, we are asking for more than $4.5 billion, $15.3 billion over 5 years for investments in state and local police. That includes a $2.4 billion increase in cops hiring just for FY24 alone, an increase of $20 million for our Project Safe Neighborhoods, an increase in $59 million for public safety officer benefit programs for the survivors of deceased officers, additional $884 million for new gun crime prevention strategies to be given to state and locals for recruitment, retention, and training. So with respect, there may be some people in the country calling for defunding the police, but it is not the Justice Department, and it is not President Biden, who made quite clear that he wants to increase the funding.
Well, I'm not focusing on defund the police, but I am focusing on all across the country, there's public revolt against prosecutors who are considering milder treatment of criminals. So the clear sentiment of the country is to tackle violent crime by making it tough on criminals. Do you agree with that or not?
No, I do agree with that, and our focus is on making it tough on violent criminals. That's where we are putting our resources. Those are the sentences we're asking our prosecutors to seek. Those are the cases we're asking our prosecutors to bring.
Let me ask you about the immigration crisis. The department caseload, pending immigration caseload, stands at over 2.1 million and growing. According to TRAC, a nonpartisan nonprofit data research center that reports on U.S. immigration court statistics, since the start of the Biden administration, the growth in the backlog has been accelerating for the last 6 months, and yet the administration determined to repeal Title 42. The U.S. is on the verge of a deluge of new migrants if that occurs. The pending immigration case backlog is outrageous. According to TRAC, the nonpartisan group, since the start of the Biden administration, the growth of the backlog has been accelerating at a breakneck speed. 423,000 new cases in just the last 6 months. And yet, with this administration determined to repeal Title 42, the U.S. is on the verge of a deluge of new migrants. What do you say to that?
Well, you're right about the increase in the backlog. That's why we're asking for 965 new staff for the immigration courts, 150 new IJ teams, and that's why we're asking for an additional $367.1 million for a backlog reduction initiative to enable us to use new technologies, virtual courtrooms, dedicated dockets, et cetera. The Title 42 problem, Title 42 was an emergency authorization for the pandemic. The only question about whether Title 42 can be continued is if the pandemic is continuing. And it does not appear to be continuing. We already had one court that ordered the end to the Title 42 process because of the end of the pandemic. It's the same thing that's led to the reasons why mask mandates and all those other things have had to come down. So Title 42 is just a question of whether it's legally possible to continue using an emergency health provision that depended on the pandemic. Now, what the administration has to do instead are policies to be adopted by the Department of Homeland Security, which they've issued notice of proposed rulemaking to take place when Title 42 comes down. And those are the policies that DHS believes will substitute. But Title 42 it's just a question of once the pandemic is down, the grounds for using Title 42 fall away, the legal grounds.
Your budget includes $150 million to provide taxpayer-funded lawyers to individuals and families in immigration proceedings. $150 million could be better spent, in my judgment, shoring up the border in preparation for the termination of Title 42. We know that tax border policies incentivize illegal entry and help fuel the illicit activities of criminal organizations and the cartels in Mexico and the Northern Triangle countries as they profit off human trafficking. The impact the administration's border policies have had on smuggling, human trafficking, and other transnational organized crime. What are we doing to prepare for a potential wave of undocumented immigrants surging the border once Title 42 is ended, if it is?
So on the first question you asked about human smuggling, again, one of the first things I did when I came into the department was established what we call Task Force Alpha, which is aimed at human smuggling, particularly from the Northern Triangle countries, exactly as you describe, and from Mexico. It is a task force of the Justice Department and the Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. Attorney's offices all across the southwest border. They have been identifying smuggling groups in the Northern Triangle countries and Mexico, and have been prosecuting large numbers of those people. And yes, they're going to have to ramp up, and they are ramping up. We have money in the budget for additional money for that task force. My understanding of what Homeland Security has in mind to replace Title 42 is an authorized pathways program. As I understand it, people will have to present at the ports using this app called, I think it's called CBP One, to schedule appointments, or they have to make arrangements in their own countries. And if they cross otherwise, the presumption will be against them being eligible for asylum. I'm not sure I've gotten their entire program, but I believe that's the main elements of it.
Mr. Cartwright?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Attorney General, one of my favorite authors said this about corrections. He said, the degree of civilization of a society can be measured on entering its prisons. And I know you agree with that. And part of why I know it is because a quarter of the money we send to your department goes to the administration of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. We just crossed over a grim anniversary, and it was the 10-year anniversary of the murder of Eric Williams at United States Prison in Canaan in Wayne County in my district. Eric Williams was alone patrolling in the prison, and he was attacked by a violent criminal, a gang member, who stabbed him so many times I won't repeat that here. And there's no question that if Eric Williams had a partner, he would not have been killed. You and I have discussed the level of staffing and the practice of augmentation, but I'm thrilled that in the fiscal year 2023, we included $180.5 million above the request of the President to sustain and increase hiring efforts. That's the only answer, is put more money toward the salaries and expenses of the Bureau of Prisons if we're gonna make prisons safer, not only for the correctional officers, but also for the inmates. My hope and expectation is that this extra funding will help the Bureau reduce its reliance on augmentation, that is the diversion of non-correctional officer staff for CO duties. Since the beginning of my time in Congress, I've been raising my voice about this. Can you provide us an update on how these funds are being implemented by the Bureau of Prisons?
Yes, so you're right, Congressman. Being a correctional officer is an extraordinarily dangerous job, and the pay isn't what it should be in order to encourage people to come. And some of the locations are difficult locations to live in with a family. So recruitment and retention and promotion are difficult for the Bureau of Prisons. That's why we've asked for, in this budget, $109 million particularly for hiring and retention incentives. We've been able to work out an arrangement with OPM to provide higher amounts of money for incentive hiring than would normally be available. And I'm advised by BOP that 1/3 of their facilities already have these hiring incentives in place as of February, but we'll need additional money in this budget to continue that program. We're at about 86% of authorized positions now filled. But you're right, we have to rely on augmentation, and that's not good. Even though the non-correctional officers are given correctional officer training, it's still not the right solution. We've asked for an increase in $251.7 million for BOP for new staff. That will give us 2,250 new staff through the end of FY '24. If we're able to achieve that hiring, we'll be in a much better place with respect to the safety of both the officers and the inmates.
Thank you, sir. The first hearing we had in CJS this year was we had the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, come on in, and he testified that his office is concerned about the impact staffing shortages have had on non-correctional officer positions, particularly doctors and nurses. What can you tell us about BOP's efforts to hire in these critical positions?
I'm sorry, this is another question I'm going to have to answer with I'm not sure, or maybe I don't know, and I'll have to get our staff to get back together with yours. I haven't focused particularly on the medical staff, but my guess is we have enormous difficulty hiring them, just as we have difficulty hiring the other staff.
Well, we'll follow up with you. I want to say I agree with Mr. Elzey. We appreciate I don't know answers if that's the truth.
I'm hoping not to have too many.
Too many people guessing or taking stabs at things they don't know about. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Clyde?
Thank you, Attorney General. On September the 30th, 2023, there was a FOIA request made regarding the ongoing attacks against pro-life organizations. And under federal law, as I understand, federal agencies have 20 working days to respond to FOIA requests. Is that not correct?
Yes, that's the law.
Okay, great. To date, the Department of Justice has not complied with the request, and I have the request in front of me. It was sent to you and to the FBI. It says FOIA communications pertaining to the ongoing attacks against pro-life organizations. And Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to enter this into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. It's been nearly 6 months. Why has the Department of Justice not complied with federal law on this request? I mean, this is a request sent by multiple entities, by Advancing American Freedom, Concerned Women for America, Heritage Action, Family Research Council, all joined together on this FOIA request, and it has gone unanswered. Why?
So again, I obviously don't know that particular request. We get thousands and thousands of FOIA requests, and some take longer to answer than others. This one sounds in part to be asking about ongoing investigations, and of course that requires redaction of information to protect the investigation so that the investigations succeed. But I don't know the specifics, and I'll be happy to have my staff get in touch with you.
I would appreciate an answer to this FOIA request. Okay. On that note, there's another FOIA request that was sent by a concerned citizen in Washington, D.C. And that concerned citizen requested access to records concerning data related to the prosecution of homicide, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, larceny, motor vehicle theft, and arson that occurred in Washington, D.C. in the last 5 years. The response to that request was denied. And it says, the United States Attorney informed you that it does not maintain records such as those that you described. The United States Attorney in Washington, D.C. does not maintain records on the prosecution of violent crime in Washington, D.C. That stuns me.
Again, I don't know the specifics here. I'd be happy to have staff get back to you. Obviously, some of the statistics only the Metropolitan Police Department has.
I don't mean arrest. I mean prosecution.
I don't know the answer to that question, and I'll be happy
Okay,
to get
can I get your commitment that we can have those records of prosecution of violent crime in D.C.?
Yeah, you have my commitment that my staff will get in touch with yours and with the U.S. Attorney's Office to find out what the holdup here is.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. One last question for you regarding firearm tracing. In your belief, is every firearm trace that is conducted by ATF linked to an actual crime?
Well, when you say every, it's always a potential problem. The normal way in which tracing happens is that a police department submits a request based on a gun found at a crime scene. I don't know whether there's something outside of that, but that's typically what happens. State and local police or federal law enforcement gets a gun at a crime scene and then tries to trace back where it was purchased from.
Okay. Last year, Representative Cloud from Texas sent a letter regarding firearm traces, and part of the response to that letter said, the NTC only traces crime guns, and every trace must be identified as such by the requester selecting the appropriate crime code. And we requested in a follow-up letter, please provide a list of all the crime codes an agency must choose from when a trace is requested. So far, we've gotten no response to that letter. It's been a year. Will you commit that you will respond to that letter
Again,
with the crime codes?
I will certainly commit that my staff will get the letter from you, and will then contact ATF and find out what the holdup is.
Okay, great, because I can personally attest as a federal firearms licensee myself, being the recipient of trace requests, there are multiple traces that have nothing to do with crime whatsoever. Whether it's a gun that was lost, whether it was a gun that was sent back to the manufacturer for repair and we get a trace on it, whether it's a gun that's voluntarily turned into a law enforcement agency for a temporary hold that we get a trace on, or whether a gun was owned by an employee that currently has it and we got a trace on that gun, which I don't understand. So I really don't understand how the tracing process works, and I really want to understand
I
that.
think you're entitled to an explanation, and I'm going to ask the people from ATF to get together with your staff and
Great.
provide you with an explanation.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Mr. Morelli?
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. Attorney General, as I asked my first round of questions, I think I unfortunately had to cut you off about, but I would like to go back to the National Public Safety Partnership, new initiative. My city in Rochester, New York, was selected as one of the 6 sites announced back in October. Can you just talk about the importance of the National Public Safety Partnership and the impact it has on local communities?
Yes, I'd be happy to. It's a DOJ, state, tribal, local collaboration. I don't know if you have tribes involved in yours, but if not, then they wouldn't be involved, to address local crime through training and technical assistance and resources. So the effort here is to help our state and local law enforcement partners get the kind of training and technical assistance and resources that they need to protect the public safety. There are, in October, there were 6 new sites, one of which was Rochester. I'm not sure what the total number of sites around the country is. I think it may be around 40, but I'm not sure.
And I will say parenthetically, the reaction from local law enforcement has been very positive, so obviously want to thank you for that work. Just to change the subject a little bit, I wanted to go back to the conversation earlier regarding guns and firearms. I understand since you became Attorney General that DOJ has conducted numerous large-scale investigations of illegal firearms trafficking operations, which have led to arrests and prosecution in some of the individuals most responsible for flooding our communities with guns. In your testimony, you identified the new gun trafficking provisions of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, providing additional tools for prosecutors to disrupt the flow of illegal firearms. And I wonder if you could just share with us what kind of manpower and resource are necessary for the department to undertake these operations, and whether or not you feel the department has adequate resources to meet those needs. Yeah, maybe let's just start with that.
Yeah, so prior to BISCA, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, we were having to do straw purchaser cases pretty much one by one. We didn't have a sort of enterprise approach to this. BISCA has allowed us to use a almost RICO-like approach to gun trafficking, and has made the straw purchaser statute more clear for our purposes here. What we're talking about here are people who are purchasing guns knowing that they're going to be used by drug gangs or by violent crime gangs, and moving them to different parts of the country. We've established, ATF has established cross-jurisdictional task forces, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, one in the center of the country, and two more, and I can't remember exactly where they are. So we've asked for, in this particular request, for an additional $25.6 million for 72 ATF agents to address gun violence in the cities most affected, and to take advantage of what BISCA has provided with respect to gun trafficking. We've had two major prosecutions since BISCA was passed, which was just at the end of last year. I don't remember exactly what the numbers are, but there have been large numbers of guns and large numbers of defendants. And the consequence, we've been able to prevent that from getting to criminal gangs.
I wonder if you could just comment on, or whether you know this, specifically local law enforcement agencies, and how often they seek ATF assistance in the fight against gun violence in their communities. Are you satisfied with the number of times you engage, or do you think there could be greater engagement between local law enforcement and ATF?
Well, I mean, Nashville's a good example, the terribly horrific shooting that just happened. ATF's entire office went on the scene to assist Nashville PD. Fortunately, well, and unfortunately, but Nashville PD was right on it within 14 minutes and killed the shooter. So they did not need assistance with respect to the immediate response, but they're getting assistance now with respect to identification of motive, follow-up, and all that kind of thing. I have been to quite a number of U.S. attorneys' offices around the country, and in each case, I meet with the federal law enforcement heads and with the state and local heads. And really the purpose of that for me is to assure myself that the state and local law enforcement agencies are working well with our federal law enforcement. ATF is always part of the mix on these task forces. It has particular expertise in the tracing of crime guns and in the tracing of ballistics. And the ability to compare, a bullet fired in New York and a bullet fired in Washington, match them up, realize it's the same shooter. This has been very successful in the case of a serial shooter in Washington, where ATF was able to match to a shooter in Washington, where there happened to be a video camera, which then made it possible to find the shooter in New York. And it operates, in addition, these trafficking and violent crime task forces. So in my view, it's been quite successful, and state and local agencies seemed, everywhere I've been, eager for the kind of support ATF can provide.
Terrific. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Klein?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You are talking a lot about the need for more resources to combat increases in illegal gun crimes, correct?
Among many other things, yes.
And let's go down the list. Drug trafficking, you talked about that one.
Yes.
Human trafficking, sex trafficking crimes are on the rise. Would you say that those who are prosecuted for those crimes are 100% legal residents of this country?
I'm not in a position to answer that. I'd be surprised if all of them are legal residents, but I don't have statistics on how many are not. But
Would you say that the volume of crossings at our southern border contributes to that rise in crime, just from a sheer numbers perspective?
I don't have the statistics. Obviously, some people who cross the border commit crimes, and some people who, and the vast majority do not.
Right.
Many people in this country commit crimes, and the vast majority do not. I don't have the statistics you're asking for.
But you also would agree that in addition to the migrants who are detained and then released into the country and then commit crimes, increase those numbers of crimes in this country, the number of gotaways who evade apprehension and then commit crimes also increases the number of crimes committed in this country, correct?
I'm stuck in the syllogism here. I think that the answer is the more people who commit crimes, the more crimes we have in the country.
Right. So would you agree then that, and support efforts to try and contain that crossing at our southern border to essentially secure our southern border so that fewer are crossing who are either gotaways or not in this country legally, would help contribute to a decrease in the number of crimes committed?
Yeah, as I was explaining, I think that Department of Homeland Security, which has the responsibility for the border, obviously, has a notice of proposed rulemaking with respect to funneling the people to the ports of entry and making the vetting required at those locations or back at an embassy or otherwise, or having to seek asylum first in a country through which they travel, all of which are aimed at the purpose that you're talking about.
Have you taken positions on those proposals to say require that you request asylum from the country from which you're coming, Mexico, if you're coming from a Central American country?
Yeah, so our job, of course, is to look at the legality of the program. The policy is determined by DHS, and we have approved these programs as being legal.
Okay. But you haven't taken any position on efforts to secure the border, which would actually help your department?
We're obviously, let me put it this way, eager to do everything possible to secure the border. I don't think anybody would not feel that way.
All right. I want to go briefly to a conversation we had with IG Horowitz at the most recent open annual worldwide threats hearing in the Senate. FBI Director Wray admitted that the FBI has in the past, according to the Wall Street Journal, bought precise geolocation data before backing away from the practice in the face of thorny legal issues. IG Horowitz last week agreed with my concerns about this disturbing practice. In fact, he said the DOJ, quote, took advantage of legal ambiguities before the Supreme Court's decision in Carpenter v. U.S. And he went on to say that post-Carpenter, of course, that shouldn't have happened. Do you agree with what DOJ Inspector General told the subcommittee last week, that government agencies' purchases of information about Americans' location should not have happened after Carpenter?
Yep. So Carpenter occurred during the last administration. My understanding from reading Director Wray's testimony is that, I don't remember what year this occurred in, but that they did take some geolocation data but no longer do so and haven't done so for a couple of years.
Okay, so
I don't know any more than what he testified to.
no parts of DOJ or other agencies are buying similarly sensitive information like about Americans' communications or activity, financial or otherwise?
Well, we're jumped from purchases of aggregate of commercial information.
Well, let's stay there. Are any
Those are
parts
two
of DOJ still purchasing
Yeah,
location
so
information?
that question, the department has an investigation going on internally to find out which parts.
But you don't know?
No, because it's ongoing. I don't mean investigation in a pejorative sense, but we're looking into that question. My understanding on geolocation is that we don't purchase that.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Thank you.
Ms. Ming?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Attorney General Garland, for your service to this country and for your leadership, especially in the last few years in helping our country protecting our country from violent crime and especially hate crimes over the last several years. I know that public safety is on top of the mind for all of us on both sides of the aisle. We talked a little bit about threats of drug trafficking, human trafficking, and other types of serious crimes, and wanted to know if the Republicans' proposed cuts of 22% to 2022 levels were enacted, how would that affect public safety in this country?
Well, I don't know who's proposing the cut, but we were asked to, by a member of the larger Appropriations Committee, to evaluate the consequences of a 22% cut. And the consequences would be devastating to public safety. They would make it enormous cuts in parts of the Justice Department, from our law enforcement agencies to our grant-making agencies, all of which are used for the purpose of improving public safety, and it would devastate all those programs.
If a 22% cut was enacted, would it impact our ability to maintain and hire cops
Yes, so we don't do the actual hiring of.
or grants for hiring?
Yeah, if you mean by cops, state and local, yeah. Yes, it would dramatically. The COPS program itself estimates 300 to 400 fewer federally law enforcement funded COPS positions would be available, be a reduction of $50 million in the COPS hiring program.
So cuts to these grants could lead to smaller police forces across the country.
Yes, and of course, it isn't only the OJP, the COPS grants that provide money for state and local police. The Burn JAG and are administered by the Office of Justice Programs, and others within that also provide funding for local governments, and those would be cut as well. So yes, there would be a reduction in the ability of state and local police to hire.
And specifically on hate crimes, if cuts were enacted, how restrained would your department be in supporting our community-based organizations and combating hate crimes?
I don't think we have a. I don't think I have a specific breakdown with respect to that, but I think that there would have to be a cuts in all of the money that we have provided for hate crime. This includes the money that Congress provided in the No Hate Act, as well as the money that's used by the Civil Rights Division and the FBI to investigate hate crimes. We, in our current budget request, we've asked for $43 million in OJP funds, which include the Jabara Hire No Hate Act grants. And if you take 22% off of that, you see what the consequence would be. And likewise, $13.2 million for the Civil Rights Division. These are additions, but the total is $28.3 million, so we'd have to slash that. And the same with the FBI's Civil Rights Investigation Division. So in every respect, our ability to respond to hate crimes, regardless of who the hate is aimed at, any crime in that regard, we would have more difficulty investigating and prosecuting.
And lastly, if there were proposed 22% cuts, how would this impact our fight against both terrorism and drug enforcement efforts in this country?
Yeah, so most of the fight on terrorism is FBI and the National Security Division of the Justice Department. The FBI overall predicts a loss of 11,000 positions at the FBI and a loss of $1 billion of non-personnel costs. It's going to have a dramatic effect on our national security apparatus. And with respect to drugs, the DEA predicts a $620 million reduction in base resources. So all the money that we're asking for in increases would go away, and there would be that amount of a cut. It would just make it would make our efforts to fight the cartels, to fight, to prevent fentanyl from coming into the community, to get it out of the community, it would devastate that.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Elsey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
I'd like to address this 22% number that I continue to hear. I'm on several committees, 3 subcommittees in appropriations and small business, and I keep hearing this 22% number, and I'd just like to address the fact that clearly is a talking point from the other side of the aisle. That's fine, but the reality is that we can't continue the spending spree that we're on. And when it comes to cops, I look at the request, and I'm taking a look at the real numbers. The Department of Justice itself has asked for 11.9 million cut, or 2% in the cops program. So it's a little false to go after the 22% and say, well, what happens if we cut 22% across the board? These are going to be targeted, and I'll reference my previous point about the alligator closest to the canoe. We have real crime going on in our country right now of fentanyl that is killing Americans 200 per day. The drug overdose epidemic is killing 300 men and women age 18 to 45 in this country every day. In World War II, we lost 418,600 Americans in 3.5 years of war. That's 305 Americans every day fighting tyranny overseas. We're losing 287 every day in this country. So if that's not a war, I don't know what is, and that is the alligator closest to the canoe. 105,000 Americans dying every year. That's more than has been lost in Ukraine the last year. I don't know how else to spell it. For me, that's the alligator closest to the canoe. And as a Texas citizen and a representative from 9 rural counties in Texas, it's a big deal. That is the alligator closest to the canoe. So the 22% should be funded to going after securing and protecting American citizens every day. That's the #1 job of any government, state, local, and federal. And so I appreciate the efforts that the department does undertake, and we need to continue to make requests that take care of that first. And when we do have to make cuts, then we target those things that we need to fund first to secure and protect Americans first. And as I said, on the new grant programs, we can look at some of those that are more of a concept than a real crime-fighting issue going forward. I don't need to go over those, but the reality is that's where you're going to probably go after some of the cuts. Let's talk about workforce and telework for now. I asked this question of every department head, and so can you give me the number? You may or may not be able to. If you're requesting a budget higher than the 22 budget, what % of the DOJ's workforce is teleworking?
So if I could just correct one thing, or at least we both seem to have very different numbers with respect to the COPS hiring program. My number is we're asking for an increase of $2.4 billion, an increase of $213 million in discretionary funds in our budget, and an increase of $2.2 billion in mandatory new funds. And we're not asking for a decrease in the COPS hiring budget. I don't know what the discrepancy is, but I'd be eager for our staff to get together with yours and try to figure that out.
Sure.
I don't have the number on teleworking. I will tell you my own, every time I go to United States Attorney's offices and components of the department, is to encourage people to have their people come in. My view is we do not pay our prosecutors and investigators enough, and what they are coming to work not for the money, but for the public service and the sense of patriotism and teamwork that they get, and that the way to increase that sense of a team, and you must know that from the Navy, is for everybody to be there together and to develop unit cohesion. I think that's probably the right term, although maybe that's an Army term instead of a Navy term. And so
It's universal.
All right, I'm very much encouraging that. I will tell you the other side of the problem, and I'm getting this also from U.S. Attorney's offices, is the hiring market is difficult for us, and we have to be able to compete with some degree of flexibility in work style. If we tell everybody they have to come in right away, we're going to lose a bunch of people we don't want to lose. And so we've left that to each component in each U.S. Attorney's office to try to balance the needs in these two areas.
Thank you, General. And I'd like to close out my time by saying that in Ellis County, my home county, 200,000 people, I got back from the sheriff that they have held 79 of those criminals that we were talking about for 5,499 days in our county jail at a cost of $91 a day and $500,000. So it's extremely essential that SCAP not be cut, and I would hope that we could reconsider that program being cut. Thanks for your time, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance.
When yields back, Mr. Trone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 weeks ago, Secretary, we visited FCI Cumberland with Director Peters and spent the day touring the facility with the warden and her team, and get into a whole bunch of different issues, and it was very instructive. But One thing that struck us, besides the staffing issues and the restrictive housing issues we've, touched upon already, is that the First Step Act contemplates folks getting a job, and the best way to get them that job was job training while they're incarcerated. And they had a beautiful facility there for teach them drywall, teach them how carpentry skills, teach them how to drive a forklift. These folks that will go out will get jobs immediately in today's today's full employment economy, and the likelihood of their recidivating drops dramatically. What my question is it was clear we don't have our facilities built for this type of an effort. The wait list to get into those training for drywall, for forklift, is significant. So what are you doing in the budget, or how do we do more in the budgets in the future? Because the more we can spend on our folks not to recidivate, the safer America is going to be. And we're going to give people a real second chance. But they don't have the physical infrastructure there because the prisons were built for just containment, not about success when they leave prison.
I'll have to talk to the director about the facilities question. Obviously, that's a whole nother area of the budget, construction, which we haven't been talking about. I do know that for First Step Act implementation, we've asked for $409.5 million, and included in that is considerable amount of vocational and workplace training. We obviously completely agree the best way to stop somebody from recidivating is if they have a real job. They have to go to work every day, and they have to have all the incentives to stay straight, and having a job are what's necessary for that.
So I'd encourage you to look at future budgets and talk to Director Peters and her team about that infrastructure piece, because they can't do their job without the right facilities, and they're outdated. The question was, since we are short on facilities, tablets are a great opportunity to expand access to educational and reentry programming. With the BOP short-staffed and extremely long wait lists for most of their classes, being able to address the educational programs through a tablet is a lifeline to people trying to turn their lives around. The BOP awarded $77 million contract to roll out tablets in October of 2021. But as of today, 0 educational tablets are available. So what resources does the BOP need? How can we help you and help the BOP succeed to give folks a real second chance to get this tablets program rolled out?
So my understanding, this is not a resources problem. BOP is engaged with a tablet, iPad vendor. I don't mean that it is an iPad, but I think of tablets as iPads. They're trying to work on various technology approvals that are required under federal law. Obviously, the tablets require Wi-Fi in order to download the information. Wi-Fi is a security risk in a prison, so I think this is just taking longer than the Bureau of Prisons had hoped, because they have to, balance security concerns and the concerns about improving the availability of vocational training.
And another reason not to have funding cuts, because by spending money, we're going to be able to save money at the end of the day by folks not recidivating, creating a safer America, and cutting back on the expenses of the $80 billion we spend on incarcerating people in this country. Instead, let's set them up for success. So we appreciate your efforts in this, and we thank Director Peters. I think she's a great choice and is going to do a fine job, and she's inherited a bit of a mess. I yield back.
I'll tell her you said that.
Absolutely.
Gentleman yields back his time. I'm prepared to close, Mr. Cartwright, if you are in that mood.
I'm in full agreement, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Well, that concludes today's hearing. Mr. Attorney General, we thank you for your generous gift of time with us today. Thank you much. Without objection, all members will have 7 days to submit additional written questions for the witness or additional materials for the record. And with that, the hearing is adjourned.